Welcome to my show that's hosted by Unique Voices in Films in collaboration with the Path of Consciousness. Today, my special guest is Gina Joseph. Hello, Gina.
Hey.
So, Gina is an award winning journalist, author, and playwright. A graduate of the University of Regina, Joseph began her 35-year career at a weekly newspaper in Western Canada. It was in the heart of cattle ranching and wheat farming that she discovered her passion for storytelling. Whether covering breaking news, investigative reports, or features on education and entertainment, Joseph has earned both national and local recognition for excellence in journalism. One of Joseph's holiday stories about an actor who dedicated his time to entertaining orphans and foster children was so well received that it inspired a book and stage play based on the character. Oh, that sounds so exciting. Joseph lives in southeast Michigan with her husband and children. She is currently promoting her children's book, The Winter Spirit, and working on a new play about a young baseball player. It is so wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Weam.
So, we met because you wrote an article about pomegranate and you came to my house and left a little bit later than expected.
What should have been a 20-minute interview, right, was 2 hours.
Yes, that's
You were
because,
very interesting.
well, I just really enjoyed. You were very like with your questions. You kept bringing up questions, and I just it became really lovely. And we were having tea and coffee, so that helped
Yeah.
the visit prolong. But I learned so much about you, about the many years that you've been a journalist and your books and other things. And I said, I think you would benefit so many other writers by being a guest. You also did a workshop for the Writers Ritual for the Authors Guild of America, and that was incredible. I got such positive feedback
Oh, I'm
for the
glad.
yes for that. But let's start from the very beginning. So you started your career at a small town paper in Western Canada. How did that experience shape your writing voice and approach to storytelling?
I think because I started off in such a small community, it helped me see what was really important to a variety of different populations. It, I guess, it helped me see what was important, but it also helped me develop a style, knowing that I had to write so that people could understand what I was talking about. I had to cover all parts of the story. I don't know that I really had a style going yet. I was just starting out. I was a rookie cub reporter, not really sure which way to approach a story. Um, I think that kind of came years later. I do remember my dad always saying that I wrote. I took paid great attention to detail so that the reader could kind of see what I was seeing, and I always thought that was really important observations. So if I was covering a rodeo in Saskatchewan, I would be in the chutes, or I would be behind the scenes talking to the cowboys before they got on the big bull, that sort of thing. Um, so that was, I guess, part of it. But what really helped me with that was I learned photography as well, because at a weekly newspaper, you're doing both writing and photography. So I actually worked with an editor who was also a photographer, so it gave me some background in photography. And then I worked on a couple of different beats, including the crime beat. So I had an opportunity to work with the RCMP, which in Saskatchewan, that's like the state police here in Michigan. And all of that experience, also with agriculture, when I came to Michigan and started reporting at a daily in Michigan, um, it gave me that background. So I also used that when I was doing stories here, because Michigan and Ontario are so close. I had that Canadian background to help me with border stories and, you know, different approaches to stories that other reporters in the Detroit area might not have taken.
Well, with over 35 years in journalism, what would you say was one of the biggest lessons that you learned about writing stories and how to truly connect to people?
Um, well, I think in journalism the biggest lessons you learn are like curiosity, observation. As I said before, observing rather than not just asking questions. You're also observing. So, if you're writing a story about a firefighter, you can ask him all you want about what his day might be like, but you need to also experience that, observe that. One of the stories I did for the Macomb Daily was spending a day in the life of a firefighter, and myself and a photographer spent a full shift with the firefighters to get an idea of what they went through every day. You know what they were when they were talking about the importance of approaching the scene slowly to observe it first. We got to see that firsthand because I remember the photographer and I going to a scene of a car fire on the side of uh, I-94 and us rushing to the scene to try to observe it, only to have to step back when the car blew up and pistons were flying by our
Oh my
by my
goodness.
buzzing by our ears. So, um, and curiosity, always ask questions, always be questioning everything. I did a lot of work in data journalism, and even the data that you see is not, oh, you have to question it, don't just take it for granted and look at it and question it. And then accountability is another lesson that you learn, knowing that when you're writing something about somebody, that's putting them out there. You have to be very responsible. You have to be very accurate in your reporting because that's going to impact that person's life. And and then accuracy would be the other lesson. Read it and then read it again. You know, I remember there was a while ago where in the newsroom we had to write obituaries, and it's not it doesn't take a lot of creative juices to write an obituary. It's mostly facts. So no, not every reporter wanted to do obits. You got stuck
Yeah.
doing an obit, you did it. And I remember kind of complaining about it, and one of our old editors, Mitch Kahetian, had said, reminded me that one of the most important stories you will write is an obit because everything has to be correct. I mean, you can write a story about a big company, but if you get grandma's name wrong in an obit, you're going to hear from the whole family. So,
So that goes back to the attention to detail that you were saying. So you have to
yes.
really, whether it's something that short or whether it's an article, a whole article, 1,000 words or what have you, the focus on the details really matters. And I remember one time you said in the writing ritual that we did something about a story about the woman that died in a fire. That was interesting what your eyes caught from that, if you want to share as an example to show how really you can bring a person to life through something that you observe in their environment.
Yeah, like when I was working at the newspaper, I covered the morning shift. So I had to do a lot of breaking news, but I was more of a feature writer than than a breaking news reporter. But so my approach to some of the stories that I would do would be a little bit different. And in one case, there was a fire in, I believe it was Sterling Heights. And by the time I got to the scene, the firefighters had put out the fire, and then I was just sort of hearing some of the facts, the details. The home was owned by a senior citizen. She became overwhelmed with smoke and could not leave the building, and the firefighters found her at the door. But what struck me, and this is where I say one of the lessons is to also be the observer at a scene. You're the one that's telling people what's happening, the current affair reporter. And what I saw first was this open window, and obviously being a reporter, you're going to look. So I got closer, and there was a broken window where the firefighters had tried to let the smoke out. And when I looked in, on the bed were Easter baskets that this grandmother had filled and was ready to. It was like just before Easter. She had all the baskets done, and they were all ready to go. And right away, I just thought, it's not just a senior citizen who died in a fire. This is a grandmother, a mother, a sister, with kids that that are all going to be missing her. And because I stuck around a little bit later, I did end up running into the one of the grandsons who came after, and he gave me some great more details about this matriarch for the family, and so it was a breaking news story that just turned into a little bit more.
And it became more human.
Became more human.
Yeah,
And
from that one, because what you caught outside of, you look and then it's like, oh, well, here's this person, she died in a fire. But then you looked beyond that and you grasped at something that gave her life, that who she was beyond this body that had passed away.
And that happened another time when I first started at the Macomb Daily. We were running news briefs, which we still run on the digital edition, but there was a news brief about a man who died in a fire in a dumpster. He was a homeless person who fell into went into a dumpster to keep warm, and he died probably lighting a cigarette. And we had no name, we had no details, just a homeless person who died in a dumpster. And to me, that struck the humanity. It was, who was this person? How could you end your life like that? And when the firefighters got there, they just thought it was a garbage fire, which made it even worse. This person dying like this, and that's kind of set me off on a path of an investigative report about who this person was and how he came to be in that situation. And it took, because I had my regular news stories to cover, it was kind of a side thing, and it took me a year to find out that this was a young man, part of a big family with a single mother who had no help with his mental disabilities.
Oh my goodness.
He was a twin, and it was just, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really what makes stories. I remember, like Alfred Hitchcock, when I was watching his story about how the character for Psycho, he read something in a newspaper about this person, and something about how he handled his mom's death, and then from that his imagination went, because that person became a character, a human, rather than just somebody that just, okay, like he's a murderer. But then when you put the other aspects into the person, then you're intrigued by the story. And people like yourself, when they investigate, that's how you make it so interesting. It's not just, news can be very dry if we didn't have that background story to
Right.
it. And do you feel, so how would you, given that with all the investigative reporting that you did and all these years, how did you translate that from going to becoming, the shift from creative storyteller in journalism to fiction and drama? How did that shift happen, and what was the challenge behind that?
Well, I think what was great about this project.
Can you hold this up for a second? I'd like to. What the name of it? Yep, the
Yeah.
Winter Spirit. This is so perfect right now because we're in the holiday season. I mean, and it's a very beautiful cover, let alone the story.
This this kind of happened by accident, I guess. I was covering a news story, like you said, about it was a gentleman who visited orphan children and foster children, and kind of did a Christmas presentation about St. Nicholas and why people celebrate Santa Claus, where the story came from. And when I went there to cover the story, he was just so convincing. He just looked like Father Christmas. He won me over immediately, and I was always one of those kids, a die-hard Santa Claus fan, right up until my tweens. I think I even took a letter to school telling them, look, if there was no Santa Claus, then where did this come from? The whole Miracle on 34th Street. Ask my kids, I'm still like that. And so we just, he was just such a great character already, a true character that we ended up working together on the book. And a lot of the stuff that's in the book is based on facts, based on the Winter Spirit, which was a character that Maxwell Hyder created. And he did a lot of research behind his character already, finding out traditions and going back to the history of St. Nicholas, who was a bishop, a young bishop who did very generous things. And it's kind of like the origins of the many of the stories about Santa Claus came from St. Nicholas. And so he already had that rich history as a character. And so we got together, and that's when I let the imagination kind of run wild. I basically had to create a story about him, to expand upon his character. And at the time, my kids were on the verge of not believing in Santa Claus. And so that's kind of what we, used that kind of as a premise to write the story about a little girl who's on the verge of not believing in Santa Claus. And she meets this old history professor, which he could have easily been a history professor, who talked about the origins of St. Nicholas and Santa Claus. And she convinces, gives her enough information that she's able to tell her friends, the truth, that there is a Santa Claus.
Well, and what differentiate, in your case, you chose this to turn it into a book. So how would a person that's a writer, whether it's journalism or just short stories, come to what idea would they think to pursue into a book? What would trigger that for them to know? Like in your case, you've written so many stories as a journalist, but you picked this to turn it into a book. And for somebody, how would they recognize if a story idea does can be turned into a book? What would be the signs for them to know if they should pursue it or just like leave it at that and just leave it as an article?
Yeah. Well, I guess for me, I was excited about it. That's one of the things that pushes us as a writer. We get excited about a story, and then we expand on it, and then we look for other ways to write it. Or I guess if somebody feels they have an original story, they should expand upon it. Talk to friends and find out. What do you think? And there wasn't. If there's not a lot about that subject, you've already kind of got something new. But don't give up on your ideas. Be persistent.
And I think if you'd have to like it enough or have that excitement about it to want to invest. I'm sure there's a lot of time and effort and energy that you invested into this
Right.
book, a lot more than you would into an article, right? So a person going into that would have to keep that in mind, that it's going to take a lot more time, a lot more research. I know even during the workshop, that's another thing that you emphasize is to do the research when you're, whether it's an article or writing a book. That's probably, even if it's a fiction, you still
Right.
have to do research, right?
Right. You have to look at your subject matter, and then, you know, think about the questions your readers would ask. This book, although we start with the character of the winter spirit, but Katie's the setting is also, I researched the setting, some of the scenes, or some of the excerpts in the book talks about Katie when she was snowboarding, and how she was on a mountain, and it describes what it was like when the sun came up over the mountains. And that's actually based on an experience when I was in Alberta skiing in Banff, and that was all true. So that even added to the story. And then the bed and breakfast that's in the book, that actually exists. So you can take your fictional story and expand it, give it more depth by doing the research and finding those details. Even when I did a story, I can remember my colleague Sam. I was like a facts vacuum, lots of details. And even when I was interviewing you, we talked for 2 hours.
That's why
but
we were talking.
I had to shrink it down to one story.
I
You
know,
know,
yeah, I was really impressed by the extent. I knew you're not going to use all that material, but the extent of questions, and you really wanted to get the heart of the story, which came up beautifully in the Macomb Daily, the way you wrote it. But it was because of your questioning, and you brought forth things that I wouldn't have just said them on my own, without you digging. So I think it's the same thing I shared also with you, how even with Pomegranate, I did it's a book and a script, but I did a lot of research because I was having this liberal Muslim across the street of a conservative Chaldean. So I during a time where there was tension politically. So I was trying to see, okay, what is the liberal mindset that is creating that kind of, struggle? And what is the conservative mindset? How do they feel? Let's look at how both of them feel. I really believe that brought some, it even brought such satisfaction to me in the research. And that's one great advice that I think that when you were giving people, I never really thought of, oh, I did a lot of research for my script that's quote unquote fiction,
Right.
right? But really, it was a lot of research about how real people feel about the different political and religious environments. What other advice would you give writers, especially starting off? And would you give them the advice of, I don't know how your writing routine now, given all these years that you've invested into your career, I'm sure you can kind of go by inspiration. I don't know if you have a routine or you kind of like go with the flow. So, what's your lifestyle like now as a writer, and what advice would you give emerging writers that are wanting to pursue whether journalism or whether it's a book or a play or what have you?
I think, as we said during the interview with the other writers, that it's really good to connect with other writers. You have that writers group. I think that's really a great idea. It gives you support. It gives you, when you're working in the newsroom, you've got other reporters that you can lean on, that you can ask for questions.
That's a
Or,
great point.
you're
Yeah.
going to go,
Mm-hmm.
who do you think would be a really good person to talk to about this subject? Do the same thing with your writers groups, or other people who might be knowledgeable about the subject matter that you're talking about, or other books, that sort of thing. As far as a routine goes, I don't know that I have one. I guess I
Just
was
go.
just
I don't know that
I
you
work
need
from
one.
7:30 to 5:30.
Well, do
Uh,
you think, did you even have to have a routine? Because did you just throw yourself into your job? Because when you had the job, probably that puts you into a routine. And
yeah,
so until now you're an expert at just being
right.
able to write and
I
not
think
have writer's block.
that's gonna be my challenge. When I was working at the paper, I had deadlines. I
Mm.
had to have this done, and they all changed actually. So we had earlier deadlines, and so that forced me. You sit down and you get that done. So now I'm going to have to set new deadlines, and like as I said to the other writers, maybe get a calendar and write. Okay, the first draft's going to be done by the end of the month, and then I'm going to write. I'm going to look up publishers who might be interested in my book. Don't and the library was a great source for me. The publisher's guide with that lists different publishers across the country and who might be interested in your story, and be persistent. When I was writing this book, I had a routine where I would send out 4 query letters talking about my book, pitching it to the publisher, and when a rejection came back, I sent out another one, and just kept doing that so that you don't give up until you do get a publisher that's interested.
What's your advice on the attitude that you had and that enabled you that you get a rejection, you shrug it off, obviously you did, and then send the next one? Do you feel, what kind of mindset do you have to have? Is it a business mindset? Is it like, don't take it personal mindset? What is that mindset? Because there's others who will give up with these rejections. They take it too seriously. I don't know, I was in between, but it took a long time for me to realize, like, whatever, like
Yeah,
I got past them, obviously, because I just kept pushing through.
right.
But what mindset did you have to use in order for you to just say, okay, next?
Yeah. I think, well, some of the letters were, like you said, it just wasn't the good timing. A lot
Mm.
of times it's just not the right timing for somebody.
Hmm.
They might have just done a book that was just like yours. Um, I don't know. I guess I was so enthused about the project, and then Maxwell Hyder, who's the story's kind of based on his character, he also helped a lot because he was the illustrator on the book,
Oh,
and so that kind of helped. We were like a tag team sort
I
of
wonder if you can
situation.
open that up. Can you open to
Yeah,
some of the
um,
illustrations?
yeah. His
Oh,
illustrations are,
wow, that is beautiful.
yeah. And see, he was a during the war. He served as was an illustrator with the Stars and Stripes magazine. And so he kind of had that old style pen and pencil,
Oh,
which
that is
he had to
beautiful.
digitize.
Hmm.
And these are all little characters little letters that he created individually. So, and that's the winter spirit there. So we kind of worked as a team. We had that. But I would say for other writers, don't let a few rejections get you down. I bet you if you talk to some of the greatest writers we have, they were rejected
That's
over
just
and
like it's
over.
like part of the process, really,
Right.
is the
And then
rejections.
and then take the feedback. That's really important. No
Mm.
matter what you're writing, um, be open to feedback. When somebody tells you, "Hey, that was a great story, but what about you missed this?" I remember as a reporter hearing back from readers saying, "Hey, but what about this? You didn't talk about this," or, and that's something I revisited sometimes. But in your letters that you send out, if you hear back from a publisher saying, if it gives you any criticism about the book, think about it. Say maybe it is too long, or maybe I need to polish it a little bit more. And that's another thing. Don't stop um, polishing that story. Read it and get a good editor if you can find somebody who's a good editor to read it and um, tweak it until it's
The-
farewell to arms. I think he wrote it 45 times. Ernest
It's
Hemingway.
yeah, the professional outlook on this is different than getting too attached and taking things personally in the story. And that really is what differentiates. Where are you just going to have, let your feelings be heard about the that's why we have critique groups, and there's editors and even the agents. I remember, like, with my agents, they would come back to me. That's even before it got to the editors, with like, oh, you need to tweak this, or maybe you could do this. And there was
Or
so
cut
much.
this.
Yes, there was. I think for pomegranate, what was it? I think our last script that we worked with was version 44 or something of that name. I mean, imagine
Yeah.
how many times version 44. But it does require, and that's okay. That's part of the process, and not to take things personally, because look, where you arrived with this. But with all of that and your awards and, I'm sure thousands of articles and what have you, what is it? What do you have next to work on? Where do you see yourself going forward with your writing career?
I think at this point I'm not totally sure what I'm going to be doing. I think I'd like to. I think I would like to do some editing. I think I'm at that stage in my career where I think I'd like to do some editing. The book I mentioned to you, we did the stage play, which turned out very good. We got a community theater to do this stage play, and I learned a lot in that process. What words you can use on the stage and what words might be good on print.
Uh-huh.
With many of the kids telling me I would never say that word you have in this. And so I'd like to take it to the next level. Maybe find a producer who could take the stage play, maybe make it a little bit bigger,
Mm-hmm.
something that could be used by other schools. I know there's when schools do a play, there's a source where they can get the original plays. So I think I might try to pitch it to some companies that sell stories to school districts, that sort of thing. And then I mentioned I started another play, and I need to polish it. I need to work on that. So that might be on the back burner while I'm doing editing. So, like, this is new for me because I'm heading into a different direction than that deadline, that daily deadline. Now I'm going to have to, you know, put an outline together or figure out what I want to do. But it's very exciting.
But that's what it sounds like when you're describing this. Writing is exciting. That's one thing about the writer's life is you get to a point where you have more ideas and more manuscripts and more opportunities
Right. Like
that
you and I might want to work on a film,
yes,
eh?
yes, yes. And then you end up meeting more and more people who are doing similar work. That's another
Yes.
thing. And then it just keeps expanding and expanding, and it is very
Yeah, or you hear
exciting.
new ideas about something, and yeah.
Yeah, there's always something there. And you can take one story and do so much with it. It could start from an article or even a poem into a book, into a film, into a play, like you said, whatever it may be,
Right.
depending on how the story and the connections that you have. Well, this was so much fun. This is, I mean, it was from one story that you were writing to a, I feel like a friendship, and you've given so much advice to the writing community that I'm connected with for the Authors Guild, and then, interviewing you here. So I look forward when your story expands, and then we can help promote that as well. Yeah.
And you as well. Your next your next big film.
Yeah. So this has been so much fun. It also is proof sometimes what the way we meet with our community is not necessarily in a group setting, but like when you make that connection, whether with a writer or journalist or what have you, develop, I think, these relationships. That's also important, and it
Yeah.
helps you keep inspired and
I think creative people like to bounce things off of each other, and
yes,
and that's where the brainstorming comes from,
yes, it's
which is
very
so
healthy.
nice. I really appreciate
Thank you.
you inviting me, and like I said, it's different being on this side of the interview
I
than
know.
that side. I think I
Yeah.
fumbled my words a couple times.
No, you've done great. But yeah, I do notice the difference. I know that when you were at my house asking, you were like asking, asking, asking. But then when we're asking you,
Right,
and
I'm like, I'm
no,
sure I
but
repeated myself a couple
you
times.
did amazing. Thank you for all the tips. Thank you for being on this show.
Oh, you're
And
welcome.
yes, and we'll connect later. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a wonderful day.